Welcome to episode 145 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie. No Johnny Pham this week. He is off in Paris having the time of his life at the Olympics. That is fun for him. Dalton, this feels like the weekend stream, like the old days, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Usually it was a Sunday, just getting the quick show in. Obviously, we're able to do this Wednesday. If you guys can kind of hear it in my voice, you might be able to guess why that might be the case. But how are you doing on this Saturday morning?
I'm doing good. I was kind of mapping out my next. I have the next 6 weekends full of things I have to do, and it conveniently takes me right up to the start of college football and then the NFL season. So it's going to fly by, and I have to get some more best ball drafts in before we close out the season and make sure that I'm losing as much money as possible come December.
I think when I last saw you about 6 or 7 weekends ago, you had your next 6 weekends completely busy at that point too. So what is that? Just like 12 straight weekends where you've just been completely booked out now?
It is the summer of things to do. So yes, they've been booked out for some time.
Well, you know that we're getting close to football season when we're working this hard to get you guys a show on Saturday morning. Thank you for bearing with us with the kind of weird schedule. We'll be back on a normal schedule this next week. But Dalton, we've got a fun one today, AFC and NFC East preview. And let's just jump right into it because we have kind of a hard out at 11 o'clock. Let's start in the NFC East. And let's start with maybe the best team in the NFC East. I guess we'll see. The Dallas Cowboys. Dalton, what is your storyline to watch for the Cowboys this year?
Will Jerry Jones stop being shrewd? No, I'm just kidding. He's going to be. There's no point talking about it. I need to know who the secondary option is in this pass game because there's only so much CeeDee Lamb can do. Last year, he commanded the league with a league high in targets, and it was a very successful season. I don't see any of that dropping off. This team added nobody. The additions this offseason include Zeke, and that's about it. So defensively, I don't expect them to get much better. I actually expect them to regress without.
Yeah, they may actually be worse. Yeah.
And then you look at their receiving core, and it's Jake Ferguson, who's a fine tight end, and that's all I'll say on him. There's Brandon Cooks, who was not the same Brandon Cooks we were used to last year. He wasn't as explosive. There's Jalen Tolbert, and then there's a bunch of misforgottens past round 4 in the NFL draft on this team. But there's going to be substantial passing volume on this team, and figuring out who that falls to outside of CeeDee Lamb is going to lead to profits in fantasy football. But I really don't know who it's going to be, or if this is really going to be a hodgepodge of like 4 guys getting 4 targets a week and kind of engineering that wide receiver 2 value in a way the Kansas City Chiefs have had to done over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, the most likely single guy, I think, still is Brandon Cooks. I know he's past his most exciting days as a football and fantasy football player at this point. But, I mean, he was wide receiver 35 last year. So, like, usable flex type of option. Maybe. I don't remember where his ADP is sitting at right now.
He is wide receiver 58 at the moment.
Yeah, so like you don't have to pay anything for him. You may not get wide receiver 35, but you may get like a top 40 to 45 season, which whatever, a spot start guy. I think what would be most exciting, and we're not really hearing a ton of Jalen Tolbert buzz, but we're at least hearing like he's competing for the wide receiver 3 spot, which is better buzz than we've heard from him the first couple of years. He's a guy kind of like Sky Moore, who a lot of us really liked coming out of college, coming out of a small school, I believe, South Alabama, and it just has not translated in his first couple of years. So we'll see if maybe he can become a factor. But yeah, I'm kind of with you that I was thinking along those lines with the Cowboys. I kind of ended up just focusing on the running back room, but really like big picture, it's like this offense should be really good. And are we really just going to have CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson as guys that we actually care about for fantasy outside of Dak Prescott, of course, and that's it? Because it kind of feels like we could be heading that direction.
Well, it's so hard for this offense to find an outcome where it is good, and those are the only 2 producers.
Yeah.
Because there's just 300-yard passing games can't just happen with CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson. And I mean, you don't even have a Tony Pollard who would have been exciting in this room again this year, which says a lot considering how we felt about him over the last year. And like, we're hearing the Jalen Tolbert news, but is it because he's good or is it because there's no one else in that? Like, there's no one at their training camp that they can get excited about. Was he Deuce Fillet? There's another player on that team who is getting a ton of hype as well. That might potentially be the wide receiver too. It's just not been a good and steady stream of players for this Dallas Cowboys offense.
Yeah, and I'm kind of looking at this running back room, and again, we've talked about this multiple times, I think, already, but like, are they really going to just trot out Zeke and Rico Dowdle as their running backs this year? Like, I know the running backs don't matter thing is very real in the NFL, but I do think for most teams who are competing for a Super Bowl, you do need kind of a baseline competence at the position, and I'm not totally sure they have that right now. Like, I think these are guys who should be second running backs at best on a Super Bowl contender, which whether or not Dallas actually is or not, I don't know, but that's what they want to be, clearly. But like, on top of just, will they add somebody else? Is this really it? How does this backfield actually shape up? Like, it sounds like it's going to be a running back by committee. And I mean, if it is, are we going to care about either of these guys for fantasy? It's just like one of the biggest wasted opportunities in fantasy right now. It's just sitting out there. It's like, if we just had somebody we cared about in this Dallas backfield, then that would be a real nice fantasy asset, obviously. Like, I guess I'll ask you this question too, but who would you be more excited about as the maybe 60 to the 40 or the 55 to the 45, Rico Dowdle or Ezekiel Elliott? Because I think for me, it's without doubt Rico Dowdle, who is going like 15 spots later in drafts right now.
Yeah, I think it's Rico Dowdle just because Zeke's production, he's not like a between the 20s back anymore. He's really only making his work in the passing game. There's no explosiveness to his game anymore.
He's kind of like if Gus Edwards also caught passes.
Yes. Rico Dowdle's kind of just a fun mystery box at this point. Like, we saw a little bit of flashes here and there with him in that backfield with Tony Pollard last year. But even then, they lose a lineman. Like, and this line is getting old for Dallas. And I think both could be unexciting. Really, really hoping for a notable cut. I know Khalil Herbert was mentioned on the cut train. That would be a fun addition here.
That would be amazing. I don't even know. My guess is it would probably end up as a somewhat of a 3-man committee, and none of them would be usable. But in my hopes and dreams, Khalil Herbert eventually kind of wins the job, and if he did that, he could be like a top 24, 20 running back.
But I can see both these players being roster anchors where they're 7 points a week and like one of them gets a touchdown a week and you feel terrible for not starting him, but there's going to be so much unpredictability around this. And I mean, I know we haven't done our odds, but Dallas set at 10.5 wins, and I feel pretty good about taking the under on them this year, all things considered.
Well, like, does this running back room kind of signal we're going to see the same Cowboys we saw after week 6 last year? You look weeks 1 through 6, Dak averaged 31.7 pass attempts per game. He was the QB 19 in that stretch, and they really tried to play through Tony Pollard, and it was not working. After that, week 7 on, they were about 5 more pass attempts per game, and Dak was the QB 1 in fantasy. And I didn't look at CeeDee Lamb, but I would guess he was also the wide receiver 1 in that stretch. So I think that's what he finished, either 1 or 2. And he was a monster in the last 3/4 of the season. So maybe this is just a signal that, hey, we are going pass heavy again this year. So either way, the running back room, kind of what happens with it, matters a little bit for the team as a whole, just fantasy wise. And of course, like for the individual players, whether it's these two or whether it's somebody else who comes in.
Yeah. And there will certainly be spot weeks that we're starting, but it's just an ugly room and probably one, if not the worst room in football right now.
Yeah. All right. The Philadelphia Eagles. And what I'm looking at with the Eagles is just, I guess just like the offense as a whole. Is this something that like was the end of the season? Is it something that can be fixed with a new coordinator and a few tweaks, or is this kind of more a reflection of this personnel group and like Jalen Hurts at quarterback? Is a referendum on that? Like, that is really just the biggest storyline to me because as somebody who has Jalen Hurts in fantasy, the end of the season last year, he still produced, but it was like you were praying for rushing touchdowns. And it didn't feel the same as the previous year where it was like if you weren't watching the Eagles game, every time if you play on Sleeper, every time you look at your phone, it's like, oh, Jalen Hurts, 20-yard pass, Jalen Hurts rushing. It was like they were making plays every couple of seconds. And I think where you can kind of start on this offense is A.J. Brown. And Matt Harmon pointed this out in his reception perception profile. His usage really changed last year just from a route running perspective, how many times he ran specific routes. He ran like half as many screen routes last year. His slant route percentage dipped from 23% to 17%. And he ran a curl or a 9 route on 45% of his routes, which is just like for a guy like AJ Brown, who is so dominant after the catch, who is so dominant winning over the middle, that's just very New Orleans Saints, no motion, no creativity type of usage for a guy like AJ Brown. And then you think back to what was working against the Eagles last year. It was they blitzed Jalen Hurts, and there was no answer for that. Well, part of the reason why there may not have been an answer for Jalen Hurts is his best weapon was 35 yards down the field almost half the time. So I think if we could just get some more creativity in how AJ Brown is used and really take advantage of his skill set, that would probably help a ton. And then obviously this offense will look a lot different in the rushing game. They do lose Jason Kelce, so the O-line may take a little bit of a step back, but the running game as a whole should be better with Saquon Barkley as opposed to DeAndre Swift and Miles Sanders and other, Kenneth Gainwell, obviously still there, but not having to be, maybe as relied upon. And really just like, it is crazy. Obviously, we knew the Eagles had a fall off last year, but if you look from that Bills game on, they beat the Bills 37-34 in overtime last year. Before that game, they averaged 28 points per game. After that game, they averaged 19 points per game and went 1-6 if you count the playoffs down the stretch of that season. And if you look at their fantasy weapon ranks in weeks 13 through 17, I didn't look at week 18 because they tried to play that game and they got beat so bad by the Giants that they actually just sat their guys about halfway through that game. AJ Brown had -1 points in that game, so I wasn't gonna look at that game. Jalen Hurts was QB6, but again, that was like, please run for a touchdown, buddy. AJ Brown was wide receiver 24 with one game in double digits. Devonta Smith, wide receiver 19. Dallas Goedert, tight end 14. He missed one of those games, but he was also like the same points per game as Cole Kmet. So he was very much that caliber of tight end down the stretch. And it's just interesting. Obviously, we should point out Hurts was playing injured last year, but like AJ Brown, wide receiver 6, Devonta Smith, wide receiver 23, Barkley, running back 6, Hurts, quarterback 3, and Goddard, tight end 13 are their ADPs. So like Goddard is really the only one who's kind of being dinged. I don't know if it's the end of the season last year. I don't know if it's just the thought that he is the fourth guy in that offense. But to me, this was, I think, a scheme issue down the stretch. Like Hayden Winks had these stats. Their play action plays were down from 133 to 81 last year. That's a massive difference. Their RPOs were down from 122 to 89. Their blitzes were slightly up, and their throwaways were up like by a pretty significant amount too. So it was just a lot of bad schematic stuff, an injured quarterback, and I just want to see, can the Eagles look like the Eagles, and do the weapons? Does AJ Brown get the usage that he should and look like the AJ Brown that he should for fantasy football this year?
Yeah, my question was similar. I was wondering if Kellen Moore can bring this offense back to form. So I think it's a pretty clear problem what happened last year, which is that for the first half of the season when they were successful, they heavily relied on Shane Steichen's scheme that he had left there. And the problem with the second half of the season was that they didn't have the same answers Shane Steichen had. So obviously, as the season goes on, you have to prepare your players to change up a bit of how they're playing to adjust defenses. And they just simply did not. over the second half of the season, some stats that you mentioned are notable. Their play action percentage dropped by 15% in the second half of the season. Part of that was just due to them not having answers in that game. Their RPO rate over the second half of the season dropped 20%. And that's because Nick Sirianni, for as good of a head coach he is, he's a manager of his personnel. He's not like an Andy Reid where he calls plays. He's not like Mike McDonald where he's going to be calling the defense or the offense. He manages his offensive and defensive coordinators and lets them run their game, which is why I think Kellen Moore becomes so important. 5 years ago, Kellen Moore was the darling of the fantasy community. Since his stops in Los Angeles and Dallas, he's definitely fallen out of grace. He has not been able to run like overly efficient offenses, but what he does do is he runs offenses really fast. Everywhere he's been in the last 5 years have been top 8 in pace. So they run a lot of plays, and they've been top 10 in points per game. So they score a lot of points and they run a lot of plays, which generally are good fantasy outcomes.
And he uses a fair bit of motion too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I'm excited about, hopefully being brought to this offense too.
So we're bringing, I don't want to call it new age thinking back to it, but who was the offensive coordinator last year? Brian Johnson? I don't remember his name.
Yeah, Brian Johnson.
A bland name and a bland offense really fit together there. So
what are you saying about the name Brian exactly?
It's a pretty common name. So you're going to break routine there, and then you just have to give your playmakers the best opportunity, which is one thing Kellen Moore has done consistently. His wide receiver ones in his offenses have averaged 9.5 targets a game. The league average on wide receiver one targeting data from fantasy data is 7.5 targets a game. So we're a 2-point jump there, and this is probably the best wide receiver he's had, other than CeeDee Lamb. So going forward, I feel confident that they're going to reinvigorate this offense, but there still has to be, I don't want to say re-engineering around Jalen Hurts, but Jalen Hurts is good at a very specific list of things. Mm-hmm. He's very good at those things. And if you don't run your playbook around RPO, play action, and the run game, then Jalen Hurts' value significantly declines. And I think that Kellen Moore is the guy that can do that. And just as a total aside, I'm pretty sure the tush push is gone, but that's just a different story.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Obviously, Jason Kelce was a big part of that, but also Jalen Hurts was an equally big part in that. So we'll be curious to see that. And I think the onus also should fall a little bit on Hurts. Like you got to get better at some other things too. I think so. Okay. The New York Giants, a lot less interesting in my opinion. This one can be a little bit quicker. For me, is this going to be Devin Singletary's backfield? And if it is, like, how much should we care? I like Derek Gray out of school. He doesn't really seem to be getting a ton of buzz right now. It's Tyrone Tracy season on Twitter, on kind of fantasy land right now. And maybe Tracy does emerge enough to either overtake Singletary, because Singletary is certainly not infallible at the top of this backfield, or he emerges enough to at least kind of make it disgusting for fantasy, which we obviously would matter if that happened. Like right now, Singletary is the running back 30. I think I said last show or 2 shows ago that just feels right for how good Singletary is. But even though Singletary didn't quite turn into the player I hoped earlier on in the show's history, he's still a very solid NFL running back who has a chance to be the lead guy in this offense. And I don't know if you've been watching Hard Knocks. I actually have this year. They very clearly chose him over DeAndre Swift, which was I
don't disagree with the outcome. Still interesting.
And this is a GM from Buffalo and a coach from Buffalo. So there's a history with the player and the GM and the coach in this situation. And now the Texans offense is a different beast than the Giants, obviously, but he was the RB9 weeks 10 through 17 last year. So if he is the guy, can he kind of turn into a late value for like a lot of, zero RB type of guys? Is Daniel Jones good enough? Is this O-line good enough? The passing game, does the offense do enough to kind of lift Singletary to a good season as well? Or is he just a blah player, and does Tyrone Tracy or somebody else emerge to make this picture murky? I think the backfield is the most interesting thing outside of Malik Neighbors, who we've talked about. So I didn't want to completely rehash that, especially if that was your topic as well.
It is not mine, but to stay on the running back room for a bit, one thing I'll say, let's just start at the bottom of the depth chart with Tyrone Tracy, where he is. I'm not going to say it's where he belongs, but the fantasy community has done this so many times that it's getting really annoying. He's a converted wide receiver who played running back 1 year. Like he's not ready to be an NFL running back. There's nuance to that game that you have to be prepared for. Pulling up my rookie data sheet, Tyrone Tracy in his last season had the worst gap rushing percentage in all of Division I college football. So he was not hitting the correct holes. And usually when you convert from wide receiver to running back your senior season, there's a problem with your play style. So yes, I get it's exciting because he put up big numbers in the receiving game. The next problem is that him and Eric Gray are the same player. They're both receiving back specialists. Like that's where they make their money. They're not running backs by namesake. And he's going to be competing with Eric Gray, who has a year in the system. And I honestly think was a better collegiate product coming out of Oklahoma than Tyrone Tracy was. So I'm pretty out on the Tyrone Tracy hype train. I'm pretty out on this entire running back room in most aspects because I think this offense just isn't going to be very good. This offensive line grades out as the bottom third of the league in almost everybody's rankings. And I don't have a lot of trust in Brian Dabble to get an efficient offense out of what it is. Probably one of the most talent bereft, like offensive skill groups in the NFL. You have Malik Neighbors and then nobody. I mean, Jalen Hyatt is around. Darius Slayton is around.
Yeah, like Wan'Dale Robinson has had some moments when he's been healthy, but that was mostly before he tore his ACL, and he didn't do a ton last year that I remember.
It's quite literally Sterling Shepard 2.0 for the New York Giants. So if you were asking me to take a bet on this backfield, despite Devin Singletary not even fitting a common running back archetype, like he's a little smaller and a little more of a scat back type, he's the best running back on this team to be an every down grinder. And I would take Devin Singletary at cost. I probably would never take Tyrone Tracy. His ADP is above Eric Gray, which anybody on Beat Street reading the reports, Eric Gray is consistently running with the ones. Tyrone Tracy's running with the twos. And
Tyrone Tracy scored 2 touchdowns yesterday, Dalton. I found that out on Twitter.
Yeah, against who? The third string backups for the New York Giants?
I have no idea.
Third string backups for New York Giants or Alabama, who wins in a game?
Okay, your Giants storyline, or did you already kind of hit it right there?
No, mine is can Daniel Jones get his rushing form back? So very infamously 2 years ago, Daniel Jones was a top 8 quarterback.
Yeah.
That led to a lot of insane takes the following year. That
how many touchdowns did he throw? Like 16? Like he threw like 1 touchdown a game maybe, and he was a top 8 quarterback.
Yes, but he averaged 74 rush yards a game, which is where the fantasy value came from. There was an infamous group of deep state cabals who were telling you Daniel Jones was a top 12 quarterback last year. Evan and I are not part of the deep state. I'm happy to inform you. But the path to Daniel Jones being an okay fantasy quarterback is his rushing game. He has the best weapon he's ever had in his career. So there's certainly room for him to play a little better. And he is the unheralded starter coming into this season. Probably last year he'll be the starter. But he's going at QB 19 right now, and there is a top 12 outcome on his schedule. And because he's so free, it's nice. In best ball, I have taken my fair share of Daniel Jones as a QB3, hoping for those big rushing pop events. So at the end of the day, it just matters to me if he can get that rushing form back and this offense can carve him out space to be able to run. And then if Malik Neighbors can give him some big play accountability and that this offense finishes like 20th in the NFL, I think Daniel Jones could be like QB 15 through QB 10 and have a slightly impressive season.
God, I really hate scoring for quarterbacks in fantasy football. I really hate that this is a guy that we have to think about as a potential top 10 to 15 quarterback.
Yeah, he has wheels.
It's It's hilarious. I just did a Daniel Jones Google search because I was like, okay, I don't even remember if he's like a full go yet, because obviously he's coming off the torn ACL.
And neck.
And the neck issue. He is a full go in training camp. The other two headlines that pop up are just hysterical for Daniel Jones. The first one, I don't know who the player is, that'll click in the headline. Former Super Bowl champ wonders if Giants' Daniel Jones is too muscular. Daniel Jones too buff to be a quarterback?
People are asking.
Well, this seems like an easy solution. I can help you fix that, Daniel, if that's all that's standing in your way. The third headline is Daniel Jones has up and down day at Giants training camp yesterday. So we are right on track with this offense with Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and I will say Daniel Jones is actually going as QB 25 on Underdog right now, which I get it. But
yeah, I mean, part of it's what have you done for me lately? Part of it might be a little bit of concern of health. And then, yeah, part of it is just like, I know this guy's bad. I've seen him be bad. I don't want him on my team. But like a quarterback 25, even if he's bad, who cares if that's what you're doing?
Like he's in line with Will Levis, who's QB 24, and then QB 26 is Drake May, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But I don't even think he's going to play this season, and I don't think
he at least.
If I was starting a franchise, would I take Will Levis or Daniel Jones? I don't know. I'll be honest with you.
I take Will Levis.
I might take Daniel Jones.
Okay, the Washington Commanders. Dalton, what are you watching for the Washington Commanders this year?
It is kind of funny for how bad this team is. There were like 12 storylines I wanted to bring up here, and I picked one that kind of encapsulates the majority of what I want to talk about. But will their offensive line ruin fantasy production in Washington? I did a quick aggregation here. Braden Thorne has the Washington Commanders as the worst offensive line in all of football. Evan, two names you're familiar with. They're starting Nick Allegretti and they're starting Andrew Wiley, both two backups for the Chiefs. Their left tackle.
But I would say slightly below average starters.
Yes. The problem is their entire team is slightly below average. And they have a left tackle who's been in the NFL for 10 years and never started a game, who will be starting for them. And then you go down, PFF has them 30th, Fantasy Data has them 31st. And across the board, they're ranked 30th or worst in every ranking I could find. Their offensive line is objectively terrible, which I wouldn't be concerned about if their coaching staff, especially on the offensive side, kind of terrible. So we kind of put these things together. You have a quarterback who's a rookie, who's never played in the NFL, who played behind a good to great offensive line at LSU, whose two highest thrown percentage passes are passes that take a while to develop, the go and the hitch route. And you have a hodgepodge of weapons who their best running back is Brian Robinson, who needs good offensive line play to be successful. Austin Eckler, who people have written off for valid reasons, and a receiving back who doesn't work well with a back who or a quarterback who's going to run the ball. And then Terry McLaurin, whose best game is operating in the intermediate play. And if this offensive line can't hold for Jaden Daniels, there are going to be a lot of misbegotten scampers from him that lead to value for nobody but Jaden Daniels. And I still question if he can hold up to that game the way he likes to take hits.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It could lead to him doing something very dumb, like diving into the defensive line, like he did in college.
Yeah, and Sam Howell be damned. This offensive line also gave up the second most sacks in the league last year, and they've done nothing to improve that offensive line. So I'm just really worried that there are really exciting names on this offense. Obviously, there have been Sanat truthers. There are Jahan Dotson revivalists. There are Terry McLaurin till they die lovers. There are Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler people. There are 5 good fantasy assets on this team. And then there's Jaden Daniels, who right now is QB 11 on Underdog. Like, there is a ton of value to be had here, but is the offensive line going to ruin our day? And none of them are going to be good because they can't stay on the field consistently.
Yeah, and for me, it's kind of all eyes on Jaden Daniels. Like, can he be better than what Washington has had the last handful of years? Not a high bar, But this is a rookie quarterback. This is a rookie quarterback who, like you said, was used in a very specific way in college, hitches and goes. Like, was that because of the receiving personnel? Was that because that is what he's best at? Was it a combination of those things? Was it also because he struggles with processing over the middle, timing over the middle? I don't really know, but those are just things we're going to learn more about in the NFL, because it just obviously will not look the same in the NFL. And I care about Jaden Daniels from a Jaden Daniels fantasy perspective too. Like you say, he's a top 12 quarterback right now. I don't have him like that, but obviously I can see a world where that does happen if he's good enough throwing the ball. He's got the Daniel Jones like running cheat code, probably. Maybe not as many. I don't know. Touchdowns are fluky, but he is like probably going to be a better pure runner, or at least a more talented pure runner. Maybe not a better producer on the ground than Daniel Jones. So like he's obviously got a path to fantasy relevance. But what I really care about is the other guys, like Terry McLaurin, to a lesser extent, Jahan Dotson. And then you've got the running backs that you mentioned. I'm not really caring about the tight end position. Like Zach Ertz may be more fantasy relevant than Sanat this year. In fact, I would bet that he probably will be.
This year, taking fullback reps at practice for anybody interested. If you draft fullbacks, good luck.
So like Dotson, like you said, he could be kind of a bounce back guy this year if things go okay. The running backs are both cheap enough to where I think they could maybe be okay with subpar quarterback play. And it matters a little bit less, obviously, how the quarterback plays. What I'm really looking at is like, can Jaden Daniels just save Terry McLaurin a little bit, please? Terry McLaurin was the wide receiver 33 last year. That was his lowest finish of his career. He was wide receiver 27, 21, 25, and 13 in the 4 previous years. Before that, he's been over 1,000 yards every year but his rookie year, and he only played 14 games that year. And I can't even begin to name all of the quarterbacks who have thrown him the ball since 2019. I mean, just
none of them are good.
And a bit
that might be the best.
Yeah, and like last year may have been rock bottom. Like Sam Howell may have been rock bottom last season. And I just hope that Jaden Daniels can come along quickly enough as a thrower that we look at Terry McLaurin, who is currently going as the wide receiver 32. So right now he's kind of going towards he's going obviously towards the basement of what he's done just from a fantasy finish perspective in his career. Like, you look at guys like a DK Metcalf, like a Keenan Allen, like a Mike Evans in the last couple of years with quarterbacks who we thought would be, bad for those guys. They got dinged for that. Like, Terry McLaurin is a kind of under the radar candidate. Everybody looks, oh God, I'm drawing a blank, but there are other Carolina. Like, people look at Carolina, people look at other situations this year. We try and find the next Seahawks, the next Tampa Bay. And I think Terry McLaurin is a very good candidate if the quarterback play is there. So that's why I think Jaden Daniels is a very important storyline in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I'm pretty out on Jaden Daniels as a passer based on pre-scouting reports I read from The Athletic and Matt Waldman. He struggles with progressions and reads. And I just wish
I just need you to make one read, buddy. Terry McLaurin.
I just wish Cliff Kingsbury didn't show up in this offense. The other thing I struggle with in underdog, especially, is where Terry McLaurin goes. I never draft him because I'll give you some of the names around him: Travis Etienne, T. Higgins, Christian Kirk, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews. Terry McLaurin is right in the middle of those guys. Below him, you have Dalton Kincaid, Josh Jacobs, Marquise Brown, Anthony Richardson. Like, he is surrounded by players who are equally talented or in better situations. And if it wasn't for Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury, I would be very optimistic for Terry McLaurin. I cannot get over my pessimism of those two. and
Yeah,
I
and
feel terrible for him.
I'm looking at our ranks right now. You have him at 35. I have him at 34. So we are even below his Fantasy Pros ADP right now. Okay, you brought up Dalton Kincaid. Let's move on to his team, the Buffalo Bills and the AFC East. And where I'm going to start is Dalton Kincaid. Just go right into it with him. And with this receiver room kind of being what it is, which is another complete unknown, maybe Khalil Shakir, can Keon Coleman be a thing? Curtis Samuel, there's a lot of, it's like a very Chiefs of the last couple of years type of situation where it's just really, it's just whatever your flavor is in the receiver.
It's funny, the Buffalo Bills have emulated the Chiefs for the last couple of years.
and then you kind of have Kincaid, who it seems like he is going to get a lot of chances to be in the slot while they kind of use MVS, Keon Coleman, Matt Collins as the throwaway X receiver a lot this year. But the main concern for me right now is just Dawson Knox. They played a lot of 2 tight end sets last year. And then, there was the stretch without Dawson Knox where Kincaid's utilization was great. We all loved it. We all thought that would be down the stretch. And then Dawson Knox came back for the end of last season, and he outplayed Kincaid twice, and it was pretty close in a couple of other games from just a snap percentage standpoint, not like an actual production standpoint. And for Kincaid last year, red zone utilization was a problem. He played a lot more games than Dawson Knox last year, and the receptions and the targets were 9-7, for Kincaid in the red zone last year, and they both had 2 touchdowns last year. And just when there's a second tight end, I just think the ceiling is lower than what the skill set indicates it probably should be, because I want Kincaid, he's going to be out there a lot, but I want him to be out there as the tight end, getting those tight end matchups a lot. And if he's out there, at receiver while Dawson Knox is playing tight end, I'm just not sure that's really best for Kincaid. I'm not really sure that's best for the Bills offense. I'm frankly a little bit confused why the Bills would use a first round pick on Kincaid, who I like and I think is worth a first round pick, but why the Bills would invest a first round pick in that to use him that way again this year. But kind of early indications are, both guys are working only with the ones right now in training camp. So really it's just, can Dalton Kincaid get the utilization we all want? Because top 3 ceiling is there if so, but if not, I think this is more like a top 7 to 8 tight end this season, and that would be a bummer.
Yeah, what I think I'm comparing this offense to is Greg Roman's Baltimore Ravens, where they ran a ton of 2 tight end sets with Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews, and that worked out pretty well for Mark Andrews. He had career years throughout that, and weapons-wise, this team is really a hodgepodge of wide receiver talent, like you said.
I mean, Kincaid is the best pass catcher on this team.
Yes. I'm pretty bullish on Kincaid. I think I understand some of your skepticism. I don't think they're going to roll him out at wide receiver. I think they're going to just run heavy 12 personnel pretty often. And they'll have 2 wide receivers on the field. And then Kincaid and Knox will both be the receiving backs. And then from there, I'm just funneling talent up to getting open. This does lead into my question, which is where do the targets go? The Bills have the second most vacated targets in the NFL at 241. And I think a ton of those targets end up with Dalton Kincaid. And then the volume falls to Samuel and then Shakir, if I was making an educated guess on who gets the lion's share of that work. Going forward, though, on Dalton Kincaid, I simply think he's just too talented to not receive a good bit of volume in this offense and to be Josh Allen's number 1 option. And I think even with Dawson Knox on the field, it's just going to create some pretty interesting matchups. You have a similar Chiefs offense 2 years ago where we ran a ton of heavy personnel, and Kelsey still got those favorable linebacker matchups, and he was probably more of a focal point of defenses than Dalton Kincaid will be, at least early in the next season.
Yeah, I'll have to do some more digging into the Bills and 12 personnel last year, and it might be a little bit tricky because Knox missed a pretty big chunk of the season right in the middle, so I don't know what those numbers will look like, but I do know through week 7, last year. This is per PFF and 12 personnel. They were 12th in EPA per play, just offensively. Their rushing grade was 30th. Their run blocking grade was 26th, which, like, that's why you run 12 personnel, is because Dawson Knox is a good run blocker. Let's get him out there and also have the receiving tight end, and that wasn't working. And their receiving grade was 9th. So, like, they were fine EPA per play and receiving, but this is the Bills. Like, this is one of the elite offenses in the NFL. So I'd be interested to know what the season-long numbers were, what the numbers were after Dawson Knox came back last season. But it just feels like, this is really anecdotal, but when we hear about, oh, it's going to be 12 personnel, it's going to be great, you're going to do that, like, it always feels like it sounds better when you say it than what actually ends up happening for a lot of teams, the Chiefs kind of being an exception. Chiefs and heavy personnel, especially like 13 personnel, they were like ungodly good a couple years ago when Jody Fortson was a thing and Noah Gray was there. Maybe we see that a little bit more this year. We could talk about that maybe in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I think the big difference here is that it's an elite quarterback, and that the elite quarterbacks, the Josh Allens, the Mahomes, can take advantage of those matchups a lot more effectively than some of these mid-tier quarterbacks can take. And there's a bit of, nuance to the position where you still have to hit the tight end in stride on a linebacker. It's not like it's a gimme reception. And that's where I think Josh Allen will excel. And I think they're going to have to run heavy personnel based on the concern around Keon Coleman and my disbelief that running sprints for Mac Hollins is going to do anything for this offense.
MVS is still there. All right, what's your Buffalo Bills storyline?
It's just where the vacant targets go, which we covered a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I really think the majority of them go to Dalton Kincaid, Curtis Samuel, and then Khalil Shakir. I know Khalil Shakir is like a real fantasy darling, and some of like the really predictive stats, like yards per first down run, are really positive for him. But Curtis Samuel had his best career under this offensive coordinator in Carolina. He seems to be the one they want to run the most out. And then if we get power slot Keon Coleman, that would be exciting. A bigger concern, though, just since we have a little bit of time to go on this one, I really don't see how Josh Allen does another year as QB1 with this.
Oh, he ran for a lot of touchdowns last year, and that is probably regressing this year. So that's one concern. And then, I don't love Gabe Davis, but losing Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs and replacing them with Curtis Samuel, who is fine, Keon Coleman, who was not my favorite rookie receiver, and then like Mac Hollins and MVS, it is definitely a downgrade. And we could see some growing pains like the Chiefs had. Like, they don't have obviously they don't have Travis Kelce. And you look back to the year the Chiefs, 2022, the first post Tyreek Hill season, they don't have the Juju Smith-Schuster. Maybe Curtis Samuel can be that, but Juju had been more reliably better when healthy than Curtis Samuel up to this point of his career.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be interesting to see how their play volume works out. Ray Davis is also getting camp highlights.
Yep.
We've seen.
He broke a
5-yard scamper. A little excited about that one as a total aside, but.
So I'm looking right now at our ranks. Keon Coleman, I think, is my highest Bills receiver. I don't feel good about that. I think Curtis Samuel is yours, and we both have Khalil Shakir. Or no, actually, maybe Shakir is my. I don't know. I'd have to do some playing on the spreadsheet to be able to see. But if you just had to guess right now, who is the best receiver, and it's a total guess, I think right now. Like, there's going to be no way for us to know until the games start, because we're going to hear a different guy in training camp every day, probably.
I would say Curtis Samuel.
I think I'm going Shakir.
I think with the lack of anybody able to play a concrete position, the Swiss Army knife is going to be my best bet on who comes out on top, which is why I'm taking Curtis Samuel. And he's always been a reception perception darling. So I'm just.
I lied. I have Shakir 48 and Keon Coleman 49.
Oh, so you're going here. Yeah. I could see it being a headache regardless.
Yeah. Okay. A team that I think we know pretty well, so I'm not probably going to spend too much time on it. It's the Miami Dolphins. Like, we all know the HAN talking points. We have another month that we're going to probably talk about HAN multiple times on this show, so I didn't go there. And really, it's just like, can the Dolphins stay ahead of the curve this year is really just the biggest one. You're shaking your head no. Is that you saying no? Is that you saying that's your storyline? What is that you saying?
We just have 4 years of data of them not staying ahead of the curve.
Well, and even you just look the last 2 years with under Mike McDaniel, some Ian Hartitz, Tua's fantasy points per game per month. Have you seen this stat?
I love that tweet. It's such a fun tweet.
September, 22.1 points per game. October, 18.7 points per game. November, 16.9. December, 14.1. And January, which I think depends on your play. You may not have playoffs in January. If you play week 18, you do 10 points per game. So I think we kind of know what this team is. It is just like, can Tua and this offense, mainly Tua, be good enough for a full season? Can they be ahead of the curve this year to where it doesn't feel like a battle for Tyreek Hill, for Jalen Waddle, for Devon Achane, for Raheem Mostert, like for those guys down the stretch in the most important part of your fantasy season to be who they are in September, which is like setting the world on fire in September every year. That's really the big thing for me with this team this year.
Yeah, and again, we've talked a lot about this team. My point is going to be on it, Achane again, because whatever. The offensive line significantly worse. Tua just got extended. It's like the second or third highest paid quarterback, which is a wild stat. And they either they don't adjust over the course of the season, they get worn down, or they play worse in cold weather. I don't know what the real problem is with Miami.
Well, Tua definitely plays worse in cold weather, it seems like.
But with all of that, like outside of Tyreek Hill and to a lesser extent Jalen Waddle, it's really difficult for me to trust this offense to give me fantasy championship caliber players. Like 2 years ago, the Lamar Jackson Tua Tagovailoa game, I think Tua threw 6 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of talk, like, is Tua the new QB1 in fantasy? And then he followed that up in multiple weeks with outside the top 12 QB performances.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about the rushing stuff. Like, I think Tua has like 200 rushing yards in the last 2 seasons. He could be the best passer in the NFL, and he's never going to be the QB1 for fantasy. So that was just dumb at the time for that reason alone, much less he's not anywhere close to actually the top passer in the NFL.
Yeah. So I don't think that's going to happen. I'm still confident in the 2 receiving weapons I mentioned here staying upright. I'm less confident in just about every other position group on this team and their outcomes being successful over the course of a full season, because it just seems that come every team's bye week, they figure out Miami pretty well, and there becomes a formula to playing Miami that prevents Miami from putting up a bazillion points every week.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dalton, the New York Jets, what do you got?
New York Jets, it's just, can Mike Williams stay healthy? Because
man, we've got Breece Hall, we've got Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, and we're talking about Mike Williams.
Because I'm pretty confident in the outcomes for the first 2 of those guys. Like, they're going to be good. But there is a huge need on this team for a wide receiver 2. It's not Allen Lazard. It's not Xavier Gibson. Malachi Corley, as we all expected, all of us being Evan and I, is being asked to run cleaner routes because he's not a route runner, guys. He's a screen merchant. And Mike Williams,
the Jets putting up the slow-mo highlight of the screen pass in rookie minicamp against nobody is like one of the most appalling things I've seen on NFL hype Twitter.
It's hilarious. And Mike Williams is a really good wide receiver when he's healthy. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go ahead and get this out of the way. He's playing at MetLife.
I was gonna say, Dalton, like this is a bad year to be hoping for that because he's coming off an ACL tear and he's playing on MetLife turf. Like this is not where I, as Mike Williams medical advisors would have advised him to sign if I were Mike Williams' medical advisors.
But he's going as the wide receiver 58. Points per game, he's never had an outcome worse than wide receiver 32. He's had outcomes all the way up into the top 10. Like, Mike Williams is a legit, extreme, really good target. Some might think he fits better with the Aaron Rodgers late career archetype. I won't go that far. But and we're putting this percent at like 40%, drastically low. If Mike Williams returns to form and is healthy for a full season, him being a top 24 wide receiver, I would pretty much give a log, all things considered, on this offense. And he's just such a screaming value that you can grab him so late in drafts that you don't have to want that outcome, and you can wait for him to be healthy, and he'll be a really productive member of your fantasy team. And if he's healthy come week 17, he is one of the best tightrope quarterbacks at throwing the ball, and he's one of the best contested catchers in the NFL. Like, it is a match made in heaven. But if Mike Williams didn't have 1,000 different injuries, I think he would be going significantly higher drafts.
Well, that's just the story of Mike Williams. And he's coming off of, obviously, the ACL tear. So it's just like, I'm having a hard time bringing myself to care too much about Mike Williams right now. Like, if he's playing well during the season, I may. Maybe that's dumb, but I don't know. I'm just having a tough time with the hypotheticals around Mike Williams right now, because it's just been his whole career. Mine is, I'm looking at the big gun in this offense, and that's Breece Hall. Is this the season that Breece Hall is the best fantasy player on the planet? And spoiler alert, I wish I would have done this for the rankings show, but I think I'm going to put him at running back 1 next time we talk about running backs or talk about guys later on. Like, he was the RB6 last year, if you include the week 18 that he had a hilarious 37 carries, or maybe 39 carries. I don't even remember. Maybe that was touches. Yeah, it was touches, 39 touches. If you include that, he was the running back 4. And the Jets, number 1, were horrendous last year. They were also very careful with his workload until the end of last season. And I think because he finished so high last year, just from a pure scoring standpoint, people look and think, oh, wow, Breece Hall was like all the way back last year from the torn ACL. This is crazy. And I don't think he was, and he still finished as a top 5 to 6 running back. He averaged fewer yards per carry, fewer yards after contact per carry, fewer missed tackles forced per carry, a lower explosive run play rate, and that's it. Then in his rookie season. Sorry, I was just reading through the stats like I thought there was more. I know it's a small sample size. The rookie season was only like 6 weeks, but he wasn't as good in almost any advanced metric last year, and he was still really good. And I just think, like, a year removed from the knee surgery, that's what we all talk about with all of these running backs. Like, if we get a Breece Hall that is more back to that rookie year form, and he was still really good last year. Like, he was 6th among all NFL running backs in rushing yards over expected per carry last season. And that O-line was obviously not helping him last year. Zach Wilson, obviously not helping him last year. In fact, he was doing the opposite. And if Breece Hall is rookie year Breece Hall, and Aaron Rodgers is even like competent, which I would expect him to be, and even if he's not, who's there? Is it Tyrod Taylor as their backup? I think. Like, I expect the Jets to have more competent quarterback play, regardless, this year compared to last year. And Ian Hartons had this stat: if you just look at points per game and PPR at running back, only at receiver production, it's Christian McCaffrey at 10.3 points per game, Alvin Kamara at 9.8, and Breece Hall at 9.4. Like, this guy is up there with the best pass catchers, but also I think has more upside as a rusher than, for sure, Kamara, and is pretty equal, if not more, than Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, McCaffrey's situation may end up being better, but like, Breece Hall had 0 carries inside the 1 yard line last year, 1 carry inside the 5 yard line last year, by far the lowest in the NFL. I just think like I know he's the RB like 2 or 3, so he's not being like underrated, but I think people kind of mistakenly think that we got, oh wow, Breece Hall is back last year, and I think we might get that this year. And if that happens, he might be the overall number 1 player in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I see the case for your optimism. And again, I think I have Breece Hall too. So I'm not saying he can't be. My largest concern is that the target volume goes down. I think he had 6 games with 9 or more targets. And
he had 1 game where he had like 16 targets.
Yeah, the Washington game, he had 15 targets. And it's just not smart football to do that with any running back in most cases. And Aaron Rodgers does play smart football.
But Breece is a very good receiver in his own right too.
But I think the red zone work offsets a lot of that concern, and the offense just being more productive offsets that concern. And this is another big if their offensive line stays healthy, Brandon Thorne has them at 9th overall. The problem is they have 2 tackles who have not played a full game in like 3 years. And combined, I think they have like 18 games over the last 2. So if they have a fully healthy offensive line in MetLife Stadium for the full season, then they could be a real problem. And this is a team that their defensive line, Brandon Thorne ranked number 1 overall. Their secondary is obviously very good as well. They're going to have a lot of games where they're going to be up and want to chunk it out in the game. And Breece Hall is going to be the beneficiary of that as well. So I definitely see the path for him being the RB1 overall, and hopefully with competent quarterback play, or at least better than what last year was, they don't put 8 men in the box every time and just try to stop Breece Hall, who still was incredible and had a great yards after contact last year. So,
yeah. And I'm just saying, like, I have Christian McCaffrey 1. I'm going to move him to 2, whatever. Like, I understand anybody ranking him 1, obviously. And I wish I had the stat in front of me, but it has been at least 6 or 7 years since we've had someone go back-to-back RB1 seasons. So just something to keep in mind. And Christian McCaffrey obviously was the RB1 last season. And if you're looking for, like, if you look
of Madden,
if you're looking at the next 2 guys up, which is Breece and oh my God, why am I blanking? Bijan, good Lord. If you look Breece or Bijan, like I think Breece Hall has the way higher ceiling than Bijan, in my opinion, this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We've seen more from Breece in worse situations.
Okay. Speaking of worse situations, it does not get much worse than the New England Patriots last year. So hopefully they can be better this year, Dalton. And if they are, like, can Ramondre Stevenson recapture some of that 2022 magic? Like, that really is the main storyline that I'm looking for this year. I think he was the RB9 last year. Some concerns in him not even reaching that if this offense is competent this year would revolve around the pass game usage. I think he had 69 receptions that year, 88 targets. I think the 69 receptions were actually the most on the team that year, which you said you don't want to be throwing your running back the ball that many times as Breece Hall. You definitely, and I like Ramondre as a fine pass catcher, you don't want him to be your leading receiver as far as receptions on your offense. They bring in Antonio Gibson, who obviously is a good.
The weird thing about Gibson is it was a 3-year deal, which you don't see a lot with running backs on their second career.
Ramondre did get paid himself, so if he didn't get paid, there would have been a lot more concern, I think, from people where it's like, oh my God, is Gibson going to come in here and be the one or something? Like, I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm not sure the receiving work is, and I talked up Ramondre as a value, and I still think he's a value at price, but like 2022 is top 10. And, a lot of his struggles last year were situation. Like, he was a guy who was getting met in the backfield all the time. They had just no offensive firepower. I think they were like at 13.9 points per game. Again, I don't think it's going to be great this year, but you do at least have some new blood with new head coach, new OC who just did some pretty good things in Cleveland last year. It seems like Jacoby Brissett is going to start at least at the beginning of the year. Maybe Drake May does at some point. Regardless, I think it'd be pretty hard not to be better at quarterback this year than last year. You have a couple of young rookies who, again, not sure how good they'll be this year, but are at least exciting and give them hopefully a little bit more pop at receiver. I like Jalen Polk quite a bit, actually. With that said, early reports out of training camp are not great. Did you see the Andrew Callahan tweet last night about the Patriots 11 on 11s?
I've just seen every tweet that said it's been a rough go for the offense.
His tweet said, quote, their 11 on 11 session was, quote, a horrendous offensive period. So it's not looking great from that perspective. But, like, you know, Ramondre had 2 of his best games of the season right before he got hurt, and he was maybe on his way to kind of a strong-ish finish to where people would have a better taste in their mouths from last season from him. But he's going like a 3-round discount from where he was going entering last season. Like, maybe he can't find that 2022 form. Is it somewhere in between what we expect this year and what he was in 22? Probably, but like, if he does end up being the top pass catcher in the backfield as opposed to Gibson, and that offense is better than we expect, like, the player's good enough to do that. It's just, what's the situation look like around Ramondre this year?
Yeah, and I think Ramondre is incredibly talented. When I was doing my offensive line research for the Commanders, the other team that consistently ranked outside the top 30 was New England, which is
Dalton. How many teams are outside the top 30 in the NFL?
2. They're 2.
Okay.
Yeah. So the 2 worst offensive lines in football have been covered in both of these Easts. And that's always a problem for the running back. I like Jalen Polk. I obviously drafted him in our fantasy league. I also like Javon Baker. I've also always had a pinch hit for Kendrick Bourne. Like, all of those are kind of players that I've always been interested in.
Yes, and Kendrick Bourne, by the way, coming off of a torn ACL.
Yes. It's not a good pass catching group, though, all things considered. And last year, famously, a running back named Ezekiel Elliott led the team in targets. So it's clearly pretty bad when that's the case. But if Ramondre Stevenson's worst case outcome is he leads the team in targets,
yeah,
that's a pretty quick hit for fantasy success. Even if he's not getting a lot of touchdowns, he's going to get consistent production.
It was funny. And the 11 on 11, like, a follow-up tweet was like they were like 1 of 4 passing, and the only completion was like a dump off to Ramondre.
Yeah. Well, that leads into my question, which is, will we see Jacoby Brissett all season long?
Yeah.
Wishfully, I hope the answer is yes, because I like Drake May, and I don't want Drake May exposed to this offense this year. But secondly, like, Brissett has a history of playing behind poor offensive lines with poor pass catching, and is a veteran enough quarterback that he can make this offense watchable. And that's the best set for fantasy value. Like, Drake May, still very young, still learning the game. I don't know if you've seen this. One of his big hits in pre-draft was he had bad footwork.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're doing the Quentin Johnston thing where people are taking padless practice footwork and saying, and you guys said Drake May has bad footwork.
Please tell me we have a video of him like going through a ladder or something.
It's literally him.
I need that.
It's him taking a 5-step drop back and throwing the ball with no pressure. There's nobody else on the field. It's just him. Like, I would hope that a NFL quarterback can do a good 5-step drop back with nobody around him. So we're in peak training camp season. But all this is to say, like, if this offense is going to give us more than one good fantasy asset, because I think Ramondre is going to be one regardless, I think Jacoby Brissett has to be the guy on the field for 14, 15 games this year.
Mm-hmm.
And that could lead to some value in Baker, Polk, Hunter Henry,
Douglas, right?
Demario Douglas. Yeah. A bunch of really unexciting late round picks, but they're all there.
Yeah. Well, what an uninspiring team to end the show on. I wish that would have been planned a little bit better on my part. You know, ending with the Brees Hall bang would have been a lot more fun then
I will say this.
Okay.
Because I got interested in it. When you brought up Alex Van Pelt, when we talked about Ramondre he got fired from the Browns. I mean, you made it sound like they poached him from the Browns. I was like, he's kind of right. Like the Browns did have a good run. He got fired.
Look, sometimes personalities clash, Dalton.
I was like doing research. I was like, man, that's such a good point. And I was like reading up, and I was like, wait, the Browns fired him last year.
But why? They were actually good last year. Their quarterback was Joe Flacco, and they made the playoffs. They didn't even have Nick Chubb either.
This is like me covering up a firing on my resume, being like, yeah, one of the most successful companies in the last 2 years. And they're like, you haven't worked there for 2 years. I'm like, yeah. Why do you think that is? I made them that successful.
Sometimes just a head coach and an OC just don't get along. What can I say?
Sure. Okay. Now we can end it on that, but I had to bring that up because I was deep into reading about it when it finally surfaced. I was like, wait a minute.
And it's so funny because every Patriots thing you read, he gets mentioned as like a pot. So look, okay. The fired offensive coordinator from the Browns is an upgrade over whatever the hell was going on in New England last year.
Yeah, Matt Patricia being an offensive coordinator.
Speaking of fired, yeah. And on Matt Patricia's note, that is going to do it for episode 145 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can watch us live there. Just search Half Point Per Podcast. Link to all those things will be in the show notes. As always, the show is available anywhere you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple, all of that stuff. Leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back on Wednesday with our next divisional preview.